They would do really great for the short term on a meal plan, but the moment the meal plan was done, what would happen? They'd go back and eat out of control and then put all the weight back on and more. And that's when I realized that it wasn't a discipline thing, it wasn't a motivation thing, it wasn't even that they were trying hard enough or that they didn't want it bad enough. It was because they had actually triggered the nervous system. Are you ready to bring your dream body and health into life, but just can't seem to keep the motivation going? And is it finally time to address the self-sabotage and the unwanted eating behaviors such as binge eating, emotional eating, and nighttime eating that you know are getting in the way of your goals? Do you ever wonder what it would take for you to feel in control of your rituals so that you can stay consistent and see results? Welcome to this week's special Make Peace with Food Minisode on the Fall in Love with Fitness podcast, where you'll learn how to overcome unwanted eating behavior and other self-sabotaging habits by shifting your nervous system so that your body works with you instead of against you. I'm your host, Shaban, and with each episode, I am honored to be your coach and guide in the journey to make peace with food and find food and body freedom so that struggle with weight is a thing of the past. When you tune in every Thursday on the Fall in Love with Fitness podcast, you'll catch the latest conversation on unwanted eating behaviors and learn how to shift the nervous system, rewire the brain to new patterns, and end the food and body obsession so you finally feel relaxed and no longer confused around food. Now, before we begin, I want to quickly invite you to grab a free copy of my Food Freedom ebook that I have for you at makepeacewithfood.com. And if you find that this conversation resonates with you today, then I also want to invite you to join our free Make Peace with Food Facebook community at myfoodfreedomlifestyle.com, where you can connect with me and my team directly. The links are in the show notes. And of course, if you know somebody who you feel could benefit from these conversations and discussions, make sure to share this podcast with them too. All right, athletes, now let's get into it. I think we have to first start with my story a little bit because that's really how I got into the whole fitness space. I actually am a science nerd, and when I first started studying and when I first started school, I was studying biochemistry. I was actually doing a master's degree in chemistry when I found health and fitness. And the reason why I found health and fitness is because I was trying to overcome a massive back injury. When I was a teenager, I was hit by a car, and by the time I had turned 17, I had my first emergency back surgery. I was just millimeters away from paralysis. And at that time, I was really involved in varsity sports. I was this child athlete competing against the boys. Like, that's just how I always saw myself. And after that first surgery, my doctor said to me, well, Sherry, you're never playing sports again. And life is going to look like some gentle walking on a treadmill. And if ever one day you do decide to have kids, this is going to be a problem. And so for so many years, I listened to this advice. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I was hanging out in a very different environment, in a very different crowd, doing a lot of habits that my parents would never approve of. And I hope they're not listening. And I just kind of woke up one day and I was like, oh, like, who is this person? This is not me. And I decided at that point that I would just go to the gym, sign up at the local gym, and I had zero idea of what I was doing. Again, I was doing my master's degree in chemistry. I was relying on pain medication daily to get through my day. In fact, at that time, my whole day revolved around my back. It was how long I was going to sit for. If I'd go to somebody's house, I'd always ask the host, is there a place for me to lie down somewhere? I'd have to kind of be mindful of what kind of car I would drive in. And so all of these things were just my normal day to day. And so when I first went to the gym, I, again, didn't know what I was doing. I just copied people around me. I just was imitating movements. I didn't know what they were for and what they were supposed to do, but I was consistent. I showed up every single day. And after months, all of a sudden my back pain was gone. I was able to come off of my pain medication. And that's when my whole world flipped upside down. I realized that against doctor's orders, telling me, you're never going to do this again. And me being able to do that, I realized, okay, this is my life's calling. I really want to help people overcome obstacle. And I believe we all have an obstacle. Some people have a disease that they are maybe struggling with. Other people, an injury like me. Other people, limiting beliefs. And other people, a struggle with weight. And so when I dived into fitness at that time, I dropped out of my master's degree. I went on to become the certified athletic therapist. I studied osteopathy. And then I got my hands on every single certification I possibly could about the human body, about fitness and nutrition. And that's where all of the problems started. Because at that point, I wasn't actually struggling with my weight. I was just trying to find the right way to eat, because I had to find the right way to eat. If I'm going to work with people, I got to also tell them how they're supposed to be eating. And so the first thing I ever heard about was the low calorie diet. I'm like, okay, so we're supposed to be counting calories. So then I started counting calories. And then all of a sudden, everyone was talking about low fat diets. So then I started to reduce my fats, and because, fats were bad. And then after that, I heard about this guy Atkins, who now said the exact opposite. Now all of a sudden, fats are good and meat is good, and then carbohydrates are bad. All right, cool. So I switched to that. And then I opened a CrossFit gym, and then everyone was talking about eating like a caveman. So then I started eating like a caveman. And then all of a sudden it became paleo. And then all of a sudden it was the keto and the zone. And then I realized I was so confused. And at that point, I had no idea what to eat anymore. Me, the science geek who spent so many years learning and studying, and I should know this stuff. I mean, I'm helping people with their nutrition. Like, how am I so confused? And what I started to notice, Joe, so secretly, is on Friday nights, I would drive to a grocery store that was completely far away from my gym so that my members would never see me buy all the foods that we were saying were bad, the foods that we weren't supposed to eat. And I would binge on those foods on Friday night, on Saturday night, on Sunday night. And I realized at that point that I had developed a secret binge eating disorder. I had destroyed my relationship with food. I was confused. It was making me anxious. And on Mondays, it would be nice and clean. I'd go into a fast and meal prep and make sure it looked really great. But by Friday, that's when the complete annihilation of all the things I was trying to avoid would happen. And so as I was struggling with this and trying to understand how I've developed a binge eating disorder and how I could get out of it, I started to notice something really, really interesting also about those who are struggling with their weight the longest. They would do really great for the short term on a meal plan, but the moment the meal plan was done, what would happen? They'd go back and eat out of control and then put all the weight back on and more. And that's when I realized that it wasn't a discipline thing. It wasn't a motivation thing. It wasn't even that they were trying hard enough or that they didn't want it bad enough. It was because they had actually triggered the nervous system. And this is the part of the nervous system that I really talk about, I really focus on. And I feel like we're not really addressing enough. We don't really understand the way the nervous system works. And the nervous system that I'm talking about is the autonomic nervous system. That is the part of the nervous system that is responsible for fight or flight or sympathetic nervous state, and rest and digest, which is parasympathetic nervous state. And anytime that we trigger that sympathetic nervous state, which I call protection mode, we immediately turn on that binge response. And that binge response is there because, it's actually miraculous. It is a survival mechanism. It allows us to be able to feast when we've gone through a long period of famine. But what we don't realize in our modern world is because every single day we're bombarded by all of these emotions that make us feel scarce, that make us feel that we are not enough, that gives us a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and we don't know how to diffuse that nervous system. And so the longer we're in this place, the longer we lock ourselves into these natural thoughts, these natural emotions, and then, of course, the behavior, which I'm going to expand on a little bit. And I know you started off by talking a little bit about, whenever I feel anxious or whenever I feel emotional, I tend to turn to, something sweet. And that's actually a way that you're diffusing your nervous system. That's actually a learned behavior, and it's actually serving you just in the moment. Of course, the long-term consequence of it is not something we want, but it is serving something in a moment. And I will get into intuitive eating, but I'll just pause here a moment because I'm sure you have to come back.
You can have a sip of water. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's that particular combination of fat and sugar that gives you that sort of comfort when in the moment. You were talking about this yo-yo effect of listening to every fad that comes along and trying to stick to those fads. And I think that's a very common story, particularly once you get older. I can even remember before that, we used to have somebody called Rosemary Conley here, which was a very low fat diet. And before that, it was Weight Watchers and these huge businesses that really, they don't actually want us to become slim, do we? Because then they're out of business. And there's a lot going on, a lot of muttering going on about that at the moment. Let's talk about the fight or flight response, because it's one of those things that when you go through perimenopause and postmenopause, you can get caught in a trap where you're stuck in a high cortisol state. And I know that's happened to me. It's something I've had to work on consistently to try and get that down. That state of cortisol, which is your stress hormone, why does that make it so difficult to eat in a sensible way?
When we are in that nervous system state, the only one thing that the body wants to ensure is your survival. So it's going to do anything it possibly can. And the way that our body ensures our survival, and this comes from a very, very, very primitive way, I'm going to call it reptilian brain. And the way that it does that is by, first of all, slowing down your metabolism to conserve energy, because this is in response to feeling unsafety in the environment. So anytime we feel unsafe in our environment, we are going to trigger protection mode. And so if we are feeling unsafe, well, we don't know when we're going to get food next. And food on a very primitive level is safety for us, right? That's why it feels so good at the end of the night to sit in front of the TV and eat something, or when you sit alone and eat something. And so as soon as this part of the nervous system is triggered, and this is with the help of cortisol, we lower our metabolism, we slow everything down, and then we turn on the craving for sugar. We turn on the cravings for foods that can give us a very big bang for our buck. Like, this is a lot of calories in a very small amount. Notice how we're not craving cucumbers and celery when we're in that place, right? We're like, oh my God, I need ice cream. And it's so urgent and it's so necessary and it has to be now and it's very, very specific. And so that's just a small part of essentially what that nervous system state does. But I think what's important to address also is, how do we trigger that nervous system state? So again, it's in response to feeling unsafe in our environment. And unsafe does not necessarily mean that there's somebody attacking me with a knife. Unsafe means I'm uncomfortable. I'm stressed. I'm worried. My thoughts are projected into the future. My thoughts are maybe focusing on the past, right? Because anytime that we've triggered this nervous system state, what our mind tries to do is project worst case scenarios, right? If I'm really in danger, think about my thoughts. I'm like, oh my God, what if this happens? What if I lose all that? What if that happens to my kid? What if it, right? It's all these what ifs. We are in the uncertainty. We're actually projecting thoughts in the future that gives us more of that feeling. And the reason why we do that is actually for a very valid reason. The reason we do that is because if I can predict a worst case scenario, I have a higher chance of getting out of it, right? But what we also don't realize that unsafety is, it could be trauma from the past. So it could be, for example, growing up in an emotionally invalidating environment where I never learned how to manage my emotions. And my background's Egyptian, for example, and I was taught to suck it up. Like, we have to be tough. You don't just sit there and cry. Like, come on, like, harder things happen in life. And so if you're in that environment and you're crying and you're told not to cry, or maybe you're told that, life is already hard, or maybe you're even rewarded with something sweet so that you feel better. All of these are learned behaviors and patterns that come from our childhood. And trauma, by the way, doesn't just happen in childhood. I mean, we experience trauma every single day because it depends on how we perceive certain things. But another form of trauma that we don't oftentimes are aware of is actually food scarcity. And food scarcity can either be real food scarcity or imposed. And real food scarcity is literally growing up in an environment where you went to bed hungry often. Like, you had a single mom, she did everything she could, but there were many times she'd bring home one donut for 5 kids to share. And these really are women that I work with. They grew up in actual food scarcity or in foster homes. And the other type of food scarcity is what I call imposed food scarcity. That's what happens when we diet. We force ourselves to not eat. We desire something, but we don't let ourselves have it. We go to bed hungry. We're always thinking about food. If you're always thinking about food, that's a great way to know that you are in protection mode. If you're always worried about food, worried about your weight, worried about your size, there's all those emotions are reflecting protection mode. So the way that it works is, from our thoughts, we actually trigger our nervous system. Our thoughts alone trigger our nervous system. It doesn't actually have to be a physical threat. And so the way we actually generate thoughts is through triggers or stimulus in the environment, through our 5 senses. We see something, we have a thought. We hear something, we have a thought. We taste something, we have a thought. And as soon as we have a thought, that gives the emotion. So if I have a worrying thought, I'm going to worry. If I have a stressful thought, I'm going to be stressed. If I have a sad thought, so on and so forth. And whatever emotion I'm in is going to dictate the nervous system state. And if my nervous system is constantly in that pattern, because I've actually installed that pattern in my subconscious mind and it's running over and over and over again, because again, I have unresolved trauma, or I had a bad relationship and now all men are like this. And every single time I think about a man or think about the name Sam, because my last boyfriend was Sam, and I start getting all these triggers just from that name. If I realize that those are my patterns, or if every time I think about food, or every time I think about dieting or my weight, I get those same emotions, again, that's a great indication that you're in protection mode. And what happens when you're in protection mode? Metabolism slows down and you're going to turn on that response to binge.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I realized, mainly through the podcast, actually, I learn an awful lot through doing this podcast, which is fantastic. Meet so many wonderful people. But I always used to think of the fight flight response. I didn't realize there was a third one, and that is freeze. So you fight. Oh, I can't say it. For goodness sake.
It's hard. It's too many F's.
I'll add another one in a minute. Fight, flight, freeze. And I'm a freezer. I'm the deer in headlights. It's funny, isn't it? As you go through life, you gradually sort of really get to know yourself, which means that if I feel stressed, I can feel my metabolism slowing down. I feel as if the blood is slowing in my veins when I feel stressed. Maybe I'll get to the point where I go, I'm like this, and then it'll go, ooh, and everything slows down. I hear sounds as if I'm underwater, and I feel as if I'm shrinking, all those things. And I think that actually having something sweet brings me back to life again.
Right.
That's how it feels, because I've suddenly got a surge of something, because otherwise I feel as if I'm actually going to disappear sometimes. No, I'm not all the time, folks. You don't need to worry about me. This is just an observation of occasionally. It sounds to me from what you're saying that the key to it all is actually to address the way our perceptions and the way we react to our perceptions. Would you say that's a fair assessment of what you've just said?
Yeah, so good. And I also want to honor you so much for your share, because I think what you said was so important. And I think a lot of people listening are going to resonate with that. We react differently in different traumas. In some instances, we fight back, right? So we yell back at somebody. In other instances, we run, we avoid, we run away, we escape. And then in other instances, when we're vulnerable, especially as children, because here you have two parents or a parent, you have a caregiver that you depend on for food, that you depend on for shelter, that you depend on to bring you places. You're small, you're weak, you're powerless. And when you're in that environment where you can't do anything for yourself, you also learn to freeze. And emotion is energy in motion, meaning emotion is like a wave. If you've ever seen that sine wave, that's emotion, that's energy. And there's this infliction that it goes through, and it's supposed to pass through us. And a natural response of our nervous system when it is in protection mode is to be able to get us out of danger. And the way that we can get out of danger is by running away or fighting back. Now, when we freeze, we don't actually get ourselves out of danger. We actually sit in it. And so what ends up happening is we trap that energy. We trap that emotion. And the way what you were just describing, and you said, okay, it does feel good when I eat a little something. It gives me pleasure in the moment. Yeah, that is our human behavior. We try to move away from pain or discomfort and move towards pleasure. And that dopamine hit, again, as I was saying earlier, it serves a purpose just in the short term. And so when we've had many patterns in the past where we've had that freeze response, that's how we trap our trauma. That is what is called trapped trauma. And when we have that trapped trauma, and again, trauma is something that completely shifted my perception, that brought up all of these emotions that I couldn't do anything about, that I actually trapped in my body. And it's still in your body, Joe. And I'll tell you, everybody listening, we are all walking side effects of the traumas that we've endured. The way we think, the way we behave, the way we talk to people, the way we believe ourselves as to be, our own self-concept, that is all reflection of our life experiences, and most of those which were trauma. And so there's still a way for all of that to come out. As I'm saying this, I also want to say that that's not a dead end. If you did go through a traumatic experience, especially if it was childhood, and you weren't able to talk back to mom, or you weren't able to defend yourself in a particular situation, or somebody held you down and you weren't able to do something with that, you can actually still release that. And we do that through processes in our program through hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is not, by the way, me turning you into a rabbit and making you do silly things. It's really just getting into the subconscious mind and understanding what's been programmed. And again, releasing that energy. And sometimes we have to do that through screaming. Sometimes we have to do that through yelling. Sometimes we have to do that through shaking the body and just really re-going through the motion of what happened, but not being in it, observing it, and then seeing the energy that's trapped there and then releasing it. And that's part of shifting the nervous system. And so it can look very, very different for each person. So when we're talking about shifting from protection mode to safety mode to release the emotional eating, to release the binge eating, we have to also address that every single person is very unique. And it really depends on what they've gone through in their lives. And for some people, this might take a little bit longer because you're peeling away the layers of the onion until you get to that thing that's constantly, that's there, that's maybe even stored way, way back that you can't even bring up, that you don't oftentimes actually know is even there. And so when you give yourself that opportunity and you get very curious around what's there, you start to actually notice that shift and you release the energy. But again, you're not the emotion and you're not what happened to you and you're not all these things that you're feeling. If you start to see it as energy being blocked and I just have to learn how to release it, now it looks very, very different.
Mm. That's so interesting because, if you're a helpless child, as you say, your mind finds ways to protect you in the moment. Those ways are not necessarily appropriate when, as an adult, when you do have power, but that's what's trapped in your body. I find things like somatic exercise, hypnotherapy, all those things, you can intellectualize about these things as much as you like. You can have as much therapy as you like. You can have awareness of what's happened to you or what might be causing this shift into the autonomic nervous system. But you need to get beyond the intellectual to be able to release all these things from the body. And I do a lot of somatic exercise. I do yoga every day. You were saying about doctors telling you you can't do this, you can't do that, and so on. I've had that. I have I have arthritis, I have stiffness, and so on. And I've been told, don't squat, don't walk uphill, don't walk downhill, don't lunge, don't don't try and run, whatever you do. Well, I wouldn't do that. That would be far too much of a shock to the system. But I can walk quite fast. Movement is life. And as soon as you stop moving, that's when all those aches and pains, take you over. Well, actually, this ties in really well with the idea of limiting beliefs around age and around menopause and around what's possible for us. Could you speak to that when it comes to what you teach with your intuitive eating and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great question. And, it's interesting because what we actually tend to do to formulate our belief systems is look for proof around us in our environment. And just coming back to that word limiting belief, right? A limiting belief is a belief that we have that limits us from actually moving forward, growing, doing things in our lives. And we stay in whatever belief system we have, depending on what the feedback is in our environment. So the first thing I would say for anybody who is over 40 or over 50 or over 60 hearing this today and thinking that, okay, there's like some sort of expiration date on the quality of my life and on my body and on, my health or my weight at some certain point, and it's completely normal that a woman after kids, this happens, or a woman when she's 50, this happens. I first want to challenge where you're getting this information from. And the first thing is just to ask, like, where are you getting this information from? Right? Because we never do that. We just hear it and then we believe it because Sally down the street said it, so it must be true, right? So the first thing is whatever belief you have about women and aging or women and having to gain weight after menopause or whatever that is, ask yourself where you got it from, right? So who did it come from? When did I learn it? And then finally, the last question is, have I seen it actually be falsified elsewhere? Have I seen like that contradiction to that belief elsewhere? And I'll just say that is actually who I choose to follow on Instagram. I don't follow, like, respectfully, I don't follow the 20-something-year-old girls who've never had kids who are talking about hormones and no, right? I'm 50, 60, 70s who are doing the things that I want to do at that age. Those are the people that I tend to follow because that's my proof. And so first and foremost is surround yourself by where it is that you want to go. And then I have a hard rule in life. I don't take advice from people who are not trying to do what I'm trying to do and who haven't already done what I'm trying to do, right? Because everybody has an opinion. So that I just want to put on the side. Now, the second thing we'll come to is just understanding again how the body works. And two things we have to understand is, first of all, that our body, what it doesn't use, it loses, right? So if we don't use it, we lose it. And one of the things that we tend to lose over time is muscle mass. And at the age of 25 for women and 29 for men, we start to lose 1% of our lean body mass, which is our muscle tissue, if we don't use it.
1% a year.
1% a year, exactly, right? And that's hormonally, because at 25, that's when our growth hormone peaks and then it starts to go down. You can, though, increase growth hormone by doing resistance training, right? You can increase certain hormones just by actually, like you said, Joe, movement. And by the way, walking is one of the most powerful exercises and underrated exercises ever. And I would choose to walk over run as well, right? And so what we tend to see is at the age of 25, that's maybe when a lot of women are going into childbearing age and all of that. When we don't strength train, we tend to lose 1% of our lean body mass every year. And the thing is, the lean body mass, that's our muscle tissue, but that's also our calorie burning factory. So why that's important, and I'm not going to get into calories and talk about counting calories and breaking down calories, because I wouldn't even be able to give you numbers. That's not my jam at all. But what I do want you to understand is that that's where our metabolism actually is functioning. It's where we are utilizing the most amount of energy. And so if I have less of that, then I burn less energy at rest. And so this is naturally happening every single year if I don't resistance train. Now, the other thing that happens is every time I crash diet and I restrict like crazy, I also tend to lose mostly muscle mass. Why? Because I didn't give my body enough nutrients, and the body is absolutely magnificent and so intelligent that it's going to find that nutrient somewhere else. And where does it go? It goes to muscle tissue. So yay, the scale went down. I'm so happy. I lost 10 pounds in like a day and a half. Yay. And then all of a sudden I start eating normally, and then I put on even more weight. Why? Because I've lost a lot of that muscle mass. And so that's the issue. And now fast forward 15, 20 years, now I'm 50, now I'm going through menopause, and now the effects have compounded. And I'm going to just blame it on menopause. But it's not. It's actually what I've done in my life. It's my lifestyle behavior. So that's really what's happening. And the good news is it's reversible. If you know this, it's reversible. And the way out is not by counting your calories and restricting your food. It's really by adding resistance training. And also, walking is really great. Why is walking really great? Because it focuses mostly on body fat as fuel, and it doesn't stimulate that urge to eat. Like, think about, again, fight or flight. What are you doing? Right? You're trying to run as fast as you can, right? So it gives you that need also for sugar cravings. So resistance training is important for women, period, because it reduces the chances of osteopenia, osteoporosis. It helps you with posture. And then if you see what the most common form of injury or thing that actually older people endure, it's a fall and a fracture of the hip or a fracture of the pelvis, right? So it's very beneficial for us. It's a win-win-win. And actually, muscle is the tissue of longevity. It really is the fountain of youth, right? So forget all the creams and the injection. Like, if you're going to do that one thing, I would really highly recommend to do some resistance training. Now, the second thing I want to mention is just understanding hormones. And whenever we talk about hormones, especially as women, our minds are going to go right to estrogen, right? Oh, well, I went to menopause, my hormones have changed, and that's why I've put on weight, right? But the two most important hormones that we actually have to manage for weight gain or to release body fat, we've already said one of them, Joe, you already named one. It's cortisol. That's like the number one. And the second one is insulin. And those both are the storage hormones. And when those two hormones are out of balance, meaning there's way too much cortisol or there's way too much insulin, then it affects all the other ones, including estrogen. And so forget about estrogen, forget about managing that. Just think about managing these two hormones. I can manage cortisol by reducing my stress, by shifting my nervous system, by doing yoga, by meditating, by walking, by connecting with nature, by reading a book, by spending time with people who love me and support me, not energy vampires who make me feel uncomfortable every time I spend time with them, right? And then insulin. Insulin is released in response to a glycemic index load that's very high. So lots of sugar or eating frequently, right? So the more that I do that, I increase insulin. And now I start to affect all of the other hormones. And so it's reversible when you really focus on those two things. You focus on really putting on lean body mass, and then you focus on adjusting and really managing these two hormones. And I see it every single day in women who are perimenopause, menopause, people in their 60s, people in their 70s. It is completely possible as long as there's just consistency. And the consistency really is day in, day out, just showing up for you and just doing whatever it is that you can do that day over and over and over again.
And I think that's what a lot of women find that very difficult, because after a lifetime of putting yourself at the bottom of the heap of needs, it's quite difficult then to suddenly think, well, I'm going to exercise every day. But I mean, we don't have to go to the gym for 3 hours a day. It's no more than 20 to 30 minutes of some resistance training. It can be body weight resistance, can't it? Or you can get some weights at home. Or if the gym is your thing, then enjoy the gym. But also to have that kind of restorative exercise as well, like yoga and walking in nature, as you say. Different kinds of walking, aren't there, at the end of the day? You can put your headphones in and just march because you want to get that going, or it's just as useful to go and have that wander, and because you can feel that cortisol coming down. It's so interesting, isn't it? And it's one of those things that I think only now really is it coming into the mainstream, the efficacy of restorative exercise, meditation, yoga, and all these things. Before we go, though, we must actually address intuitive eating, because I introduced started with that, and we've talked about everything around it.
So we're like, okay, well, let's just go around this way and then this way. Okay, so good.
But we're wandering in nature. We're just walking through the trees, and now we're coming back to the main path.
This is so good. And I do have to just add one more thing before we get into
Okay.
I really love what you said so much. And, the resistance training that I do is like 6 to 12 minutes a day. And I just want to add that. And again, for anyone listening who feels like, oh my God, where do I start? If I decided to suddenly start playing basketball, I'm not going to call Michael Jordan and then ask him to compete against me, right? I'm going to slowly start dribbling the ball and then learning how to handle it. So wherever you are, even if what you can commit to is 5 minutes today of going for a walk, that's amazing, and congratulate yourself for that. And then slowly ramp up, because that's the only way that you do create consistency. So meet yourself where you are and then just keep showing up for yourself. Okay, now it's the perfect time to talk about intuitive eating. And I think why I wanted to keep it to the end is really to understand that there's first of all a lot of misunderstanding around intuitive eating. And if you go on Instagram again and you hashtag intuitive eating, you're going to see a lot of people eating a lot of junk food and calling that intuitive eating. And what I want to say is that's almost sometimes an encouragement to binge eat or emotionally eat if that is something that you're struggling with. So if you're interested in intuitive eating, I'm going to tell you that I am an intuitive eater, and I'm also anti-diet. And when you're an intuitive eater and you're really listening to your body's cues, your body is asking you for the types of foods that's going to serve it. It doesn't serve me to eat 20 cookies. It doesn't serve me to eat a pint of ice cream. That's not intuitive eating. That's something else. That's a drive. That's a cue from the nervous system. And again, that's the reptilian part of the brain. But actual intuitive eating comes from the body. So not from the brain and from the body. And that's the difference between recognizing emotional eating and then body eating. Emotional eating is sudden. It's going to be very, very specific. It's very urgent. And it's going to oftentimes be something that doesn't serve you. And when your body is intuitively eating, it's asking you, oh, I need more salmon. Give me another piece of salmon. Or today I don't even need to eat that much. Or today I'm really hungry and I need more nuts. And you're going to have these cravings for whole foods. You're going to have cravings for foods that your body recognizes, because your body does not recognize Twinkies. It does not recognize a lot of these chemicals that are in these foods. That's not what your body's asking you for. That's what your mind is asking you for when you are stuck in protection mode. And so that's why I wanted to have this conversation later, is because we could have started talking about intuitive eating and then gotten into the nervous system. But if you really are right now struggling with binge eating and emotional eating, before you decide to move into intuitive eating, I would really recommend you address the nervous system, and you do that first. And by the way, as you address the nervous system, you're naturally going to fall into intuitive eating. Your body is naturally going to start to ask you for stuff. And you can get in this place where, again, you're very in tune with not just intuitive eating, but intuitive movement. And some days it feels like you can go longer and you have more energy. Other days, maybe it is yoga, maybe it is more restorative. And when you're in that place, you're going to find that magic sweet spot. And so, again, be mindful of where you get your information. And I think this is so important because, like I was saying earlier, you can surround yourself by people who are giving you the wrong advice, or you can surround yourself by those who you want to follow and want to become like. And this is really, really important to say, because nowadays on social media or on the internet, or you can find any blog or any YouTube channel, everyone talking about whatever that it is that they want to talk about. And we sometimes see these people as experts in their fields. And so all I'll say is just take a moment and always ask yourself those questions around the belief systems. Where is it coming from? Who is this person? And does that even resonate with me?
Yeah, very good advice. I just wanted to just ask you though, you're saying about address your nervous system first. So where would one start to do that?
Addressing the nervous system is really recognizing first just those thoughts and emotions, like I was talking about. Thoughts and emotions, like I said, the thoughts are always projected into future or in the past. What is your relationship like with food? Is there a lot of fear? Is there a lot of worry about food, your weight, all of these things? And then learning how to manage your emotions. And this is now the tricky part. And a lot of times learning how to manage your emotions is really shifting away from self-loathing towards self-love. And that's another thing that I want you to be mindful of, because, and you're smiling, Joe, because I think right? You're like, mm-hmm. And that's the truth. Most women I know that I work with and make peace with food, the first thing they do in the morning is give themselves a dose of, ew, disgusting, and look at this, and why is this, right? And you're standing in front of the mirror and you're saying all these nasty things to yourself, triggering protection mode. Like that's the first thing you're doing to yourself. You would never speak to anyone like that, yet that's what you speak to yourself.
See, the first thing I do in the morning, I get to the mirror and I smile at myself.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's
Because
amazing.
I think I'm just like, congratulations, you got out of bed today.
Yes, I'm here. Yes,
I'm alive. The blood's flowing through my veins, and
right.
wow.
That's so
it actually makes me laugh because there's that old trope, isn't there, about a guy looking in the mirror going, looking good,
Yeah, right.
and I've always remembered that. And
So
it doesn't matter how I feel, I always make sure at least the corners of my mouth go up.
right. Oh, I see that. You're so radiant. You're just so full of contagious energy, Joe. What I've shared today resonated with you. If you're ready to give up dieting and really focus on addressing some of the things that we spoke about, if you head on over to makepeacewithfood.com, you can grab that download there, and there's places for self-reflection, and there's also a place to get on a free 30-minute binge-free discovery call as well with me to see if what you're going through is a nervous system issue or not. Thank you for listening to this week's Make Peace with Food Minisode on the Fall in Love with Fitness podcast. If this has resonated with you today, I want to invite you to subscribe to the show so you never miss a beat. And if you know someone who could benefit from this conversation, then please share this episode with them. Let's work together to help as many people as possible make peace with food and fall in love with fitness. And by the way, I need to mention that if you rate and review this podcast on iTunes and send over the screenshot to Sherry at sherryshaban.com, you'll receive a $500 voucher to join me at one of my upcoming retreats, or to use it in our Make Peace with Food coaching program. And don't forget to visit myfoodfreedomlifestyle.com to join the free Facebook group for more resources. And remember, athlete, you are an inspiration. I cannot wait to hear your story.